Well, more city talk as we talk about rents spiralling in the UK as the market for properties becomes smaller and more static. New lets are 25% more expensive than before COVID. 1 in 3 renters spend half their take-home pay on rent. London's Mayor Sadiq Khan wants the power to freeze rents for 2 years, but Lisa Nandy seemed to abandon the idea of rent controls in June. Andy Burnham in the Labour left are also strongly in favour. A person and a group guaranteed to win over the leadership office. Putting Labour squabbling aside, that feels good. Let's take a quick look at the policy itself. Hannah, you are a housing expert. Neil Garrett, the Tory leader in the London Assembly, said recently, the problem with it, like so many other populist political ideas, is it doesn't work. Pause to reflect on a Tory denouncing populist ideas that don't work. It restricts the supply and ultimately makes the problem worse. Everywhere where it has been tried, it doesn't work. That sounds very simple, Neil. Is that true?
Sadly, yes. Unfortunately. I know you probably weren't expecting that from the housing desk, but it is true. And this is one thing that I fully disagree with Andy Burnham on. Normally usually agree quite closely with Andy Burnham where he stands. It doesn't work. It benefits sitting tenants. So if you're a sitting tenant right now, I totally understand why, if you're listening to this, you'd think, of course we need rent control, of course we need a cap. The problem is it's at the expense of any new tenant. And this is a growing sector all the time. We're now at the point where actually I saw some fantastic new data today shared with me by Alex, in fact, who'd spotted it, that we now have a higher percentage of the British population who are renters than own their home with a mortgage. That's not happened for a very long time. So really interesting period of time. But when you've got a growing sector like that, you need to make sure that there is supply. The biggest problem at the moment that we have is supply. Landlords are leaving the market rapidly for a number of reasons. One of them is to do with the cost of mortgages at the moment. Another one is to do with the very, very important and absolutely right legislation that's coming up around improving the quality of private rented housing. But what you end up is, the market shrinks, the demand increases, the worst bits of it get worse. The people who are sitting tenants in good properties get to hold on to it at the expense of the poorest people with the least opportunity. It's a bad idea.
So is it because it's in using quite a lot of American cities?
It is, yeah.
I knew about it in New York because people said, how can Monica afford that flat in Friends?
Yeah. She
clearly explains in one episode that it's rent controlled and she got it somewhat semi-legally. From her grandmother. So it's in New York. I think it's in San Francisco. So is this exactly what's happening in those places?
Yes, to an extent. So in New York and San Francisco, which as you say are the best sort of known examples, they have definitely got this separation in the market where there's a 2-tier system. So there's basically a 2-tier private rented sector. Half of it is fucking awful, really, really, really bad quality, and that's where the most vulnerable people end up. And half of it's quite nice, and basically occupied by middle class people. And the Monica and Friends example is pretty interesting because it's been tried in Sweden, and in Sweden, there's a great example of the problem with it is that it's actually become a kind of middle class hidden market that keeps itself to itself. So when someone wants to leave their rent control property because they're going to buy or they move to the next life stage, it ends up getting passed on to someone they know, whether it's a child or a godchild or somebody or a friend who wants to rent, and so it gets moved around within those who know, and those who are immigrants, those who are otherwise disenfranchised, just are not connected to those networks, have no opportunity to access those properties. So it makes the poorest poorer, and it's exploitative as well. So it's not a solution. What is a solution, though, is rent rise capping. But I think both parties, I might be corrected, but definitely Labour are committed to some kind of controlling of the rising.
Could you explain the difference between rent controls and controlling the rising of the rents?
Yes. So rent controls set the price at which you can market a property at. And mean that there's a ceiling. Rent rise capping means that you can let your property out for whatever you want. The market demands it. If you're a new landlord, you can put it out there and see what you can get, but then you can only rise it by a certain percentage each year. So you can't basically just evict a tenant and then put a 30% rise on for the next tenant.
So, Oli, how do you feel about what is the solution to what is in itself, I mean, you're talking about, Hannah's talking about the social consequences, perhaps, of rent controls, but the social consequences of rising rents are very obvious in terms of forcing people out, fracturing communities, giving people these insanely long commutes, or even making it them incapable of working certain jobs. So what, if you come across that seems like a better solution, or are you actually a rent control guy? We're allowed to disagree on it.
I'm not a rent control guy. To coin a phrase, I think it's a sticking plaster. Even though I absolutely hate that
I'm in a
phrase.
room of Nantiites.
I wouldn't go that far. If you have a supply and demand problem, the solution is not to increase demand by making it cheaper, it's to build supply. So Centre for Cities estimates that in the UK we've had a shortfall of 4.3 million homes. So for me that means the next government, for every year of the next parliament, should be building 1 million homes a year. For the issues you've just touched on, there is enormous social good in providing people with affordable, good quality housing, whether it's educational outcomes, quality of life, reduced crime. It costs money to build these things, but the sort of broader societal effects, the aggregate effects as well of building them properly are absolutely enormous. And then, my pet interest as well is kind of local agrarianism. So for my money, at least 1 million of that 4.5 million should be sort of family-sized homes with enough land that people can agriculturally support themselves in the rest of the country. But that's a conversation for another day, I think.